Before we dive into today's topic, and I want to give a little bit of a disclaimer because it will be a very open-hearted but also sensitive topic, as we will be talking about pregnancy loss and miscarriage and abortion. And if this is something that you have experienced or are triggered by, I just want to give you a heads up before we dive into the episode so you are aware. Are you thinking about starting or nourishing a career in menstrual cycle health? Then consider joining our 9-month online holistic hormone and cycle coaching certification training. In this training, you get science-backed and evidence-based education, as well as teachings about the somatic aspects of having a menstrual cycle, functional nutrition, hormone testing, and much, much more. We will have incredible live group sessions, and you will get guidance from me. There will also be amazing guest teaching lectures from experts in the field, and at the end you will receive an official certificate of completion that is globally recognized. As a listener of the Planting Seeds podcast, you receive an additional €100 off when you use the code PODCAST when you sign up. Click on the link in the show notes to learn more.
Hello friends. My name is Iris Josephina. I'm your host, and you are listening to the Planting Seeds podcast. On the Planting Seeds podcast, we explore how we can cultivate a more gentle relationship with our cyclical bodies, the earth, each other, and the world around us through using our senses, science, the subtle, and the secret. On Planting Seeds, we talk about all those topics you've always wanted to talk about. We are shamelessly opening up the conversations that we all so desperately need to settle in our precious bodies and relate to each other in a more open, truthful, and empowered way. I'm so glad you're here today.
So, hey friends, welcome to another episode of the Planting Seeds podcast. Today, I have a very special guest here. Her name is Samantha Zipporah, and I would love to warmly welcome you to the show, Samantha.
Thank you so much, Iris.
So, Samantha, would you like to give us a little introduction about who you are and what your work entails?
Yeah. So I've been walking this path since before I hit puberty. I started to study how do our bodies work. I worked in clinical settings, mainly in Planned Parenthood in the United States through my teens. And then I studied to be a home birth midwife. And really the archetype and the role of a midwife, the role within a community and within relations is what I most strongly identify with. And today, most of my work is writing and teaching and supporting folks claiming power and pleasure in the full continuum of the womb and sexuality.
Thank you for sharing that. And I love how you say the continuum of the womb, because in our Western medicalized way of looking at our bodies, everything is so compartmentalized. And I am wondering whether you could share with us what that means to you, how you see that, the continuum of the womb.
Yes, it really is such an important theme and value in what I bring to the table and what I share and teach, which is the commonality between the anatomy as well as the energy that is shared through all of these different reproductive and sexual processes that take place in the pelvic bowl, in the womb, in the yoni. All of our orgasms, all of our pregnancies, all of our yeast infections, all of our ovulations, all of these different experiences that, as you said before, our cultures tend to compartmentalize. But I feel like the more that we are able to understand and honor and be present for all of these points on the continuum, they all inform one another and the way that we feel about and experience all of these different types of experiences. The more present and embodied and the more within relationship and community and honor we are able to experience these things. A continuum being a cycle that has no beginning or end. No point on the continuum is of more value or importance than another point. It's all connected.
Thank you for explaining that. And what comes up for me when you share this is that this entire continuum basically was the altar at which the midwives prayed and worked. Like a midwife in ancient times wasn't just a person supporting someone through the rite of passage from conception to postpartum. They were there for the entire continuum.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This topic is so close to my heart, and midwives just have my heart forever. It's such a beautiful calling, such a beautiful path. And for today's topic, we agreed to open up about the topics of pregnancy loss and miscarriage, but also abortion, which are topics that are not very often spoken about for many people. There is a certain heaviness or maybe even shame and taboo over it. And I really want to take the opportunity of us coming together today to maybe be people's permission slip to dive into this topic and allow themselves to learn, because I believe the more that we know and the more that we learn about the various pathways our bodies can move through and the various cycles and ends of cycles our bodies can move through, the more we can take agency and have compassion for this process and how it affects our lives and our hearts and our relationships. So when we speak of pregnancy loss and miscarriage and abortion physiologically, could you speak a little bit to that? Because you mentioned before that there is some overlap, some similarities, but for the people who have never actually thought about this topic or have been diving into it, I would love for you to just speak to whatever comes to mind when we're speaking about pure physiology.
Well, I think one of the most important concepts that is quite radical and antithetical to most of the mainstream beliefs that I see out there is just that pregnancy loss and termination are completely normal. They're physiologically normal things to happen. Every single species on the planet, not just humans, will go through the process of beginning a reproductive cycle and then ending it before it comes to full fruition. And that is a perfectly normal and natural part of being alive. And I would say that beyond that, that the womb has an innate intelligence that knows how to release and replenish, and that our physiology is not biased the way that our psychology and our society has bias and stigma and shame and judgment around death in general, but specifically as to what age of gestation a pregnancy may be, whether or not there is no pregnancy and we're menstruating, or we are terminating a pregnancy at several weeks, or we lose a pregnancy at several months, that there is an innate wisdom and capability to our bodies, to our physiology and the womb, that if we're well nourished, if our endocrine and nervous systems are well supported and nourished, that our bodies are capable of moving through these processes with grace and competency, that our intellects and the modern medical systems and tools and interventions are not as wise as the womb, and that actually supporting the ecosystem of the body in which the womb has immense power and intelligence is more important than this concept that we're going to fix or manage or control any of these experiences. And that rather, I encourage folks to understand that the womb has innate capability and innate intelligence, that we can support rather than interrupt that intelligence.
I love how you chose such specific keywords like intelligence and ecosystem when speaking of and about our bodies and our wombs, because I see it in the exact same way. I also feel that the way that we have been taught to look at our bodies, the way the medical system looks at bodies, is actually very disrespectful. It's so disrespectful towards the innate processes that we are built to have in our bodies. And the processes of pregnancy loss are an equal part of what our bodies are capable of, as well as carrying a pregnancy full term or moving gracefully into menopause. So I really appreciate you taking the time to explain it in such a way and use these specific words, because I couldn't agree with you more that our wombs and our entire body system is so extremely intelligent. How do you encourage people to tap into that intelligence in whatever cyclical process you are supporting them through?
Yeah, I mean, the basic sort of nervous system support, whatever it takes to actually get the body into a receptive, restful space so that it can do its own job. It's like we really, a lot of the time, need to get our thinking brains to be calmed and out of the way. We have a lot of very harmful false urgency around pregnancy as a whole, regardless of how it ends. I feel like our culture, it treats pregnancy as a pathology, as an illness, as something that needs to be managed. And especially in the case of loss and termination, a lot of people experience a sense of urgency that is very culturally and psychologically imposed and not actually physically true. And so to begin with, just what can help someone feel calm and nurtured, and that a lot of the best choices that we can make are not choices that we're going to make intellectually. They're realizations that are going to occur to us when we're in a receptive space. There's something I call the 4 pillars of nourishment for a bleeding body, that again, just going back to the full womb continuum rather than isolating miscarriage or abortion, to look at all of our cycles, our menstrual cycles, all of our pregnancy releases where the womb is bleeding, that the 4 basic things that we need, that traditional cultures and our ancestors knew very well. We need rest, warmth, nourishment, and community.
I love that. And this directly interconnects with like the image that I have of a midwife. The midwife is like this warm cloak of these 4 pillars that she gives to people with bleeding bodies in her community. And I love that you call it pillars, because pillars support a foundation. And I love that. They're the foundation of our cyclical continuum, I feel.
Yes.
In whatever stage we're in, even when I think about menopause, all these 4 pillars fully apply. Yeah. And, I think we are both very aware of how to access these 4 pillars and what they mean. But how would we be able to support people in what you call reclaiming the full womb continuum? And with that, also help people understand that de-medicalizing our care does not mean unsafe or does not mean less care.
Right. Well, I think the first thing that really comes to mind is really letting go of this illusion that self-care is what we need, when community care and relationality is what we really need. Yes. When we are going through these passages where our bodies are open in the whole continuum of when we are bleeding and releasing and moving energy in that way, that rather than establishing those pillars for ourselves, it is actually the responsibility of our loved ones to provide them for us. So when I work with clients on this, I have worksheets and handouts, and I try and involve whoever else is in the household, if it is a safe and supportive relationship of any sort, and pull in as much support from outside of that person to establish the safety and the sanctuary that is needed to really heal and to go through a process without thinking that you're going to be providing for yourself. That is our responsibility to provide for one another in these times. So that's a start. And then I would also say that practicing through menstruation is really powerful and important as well. And that the way that we experience and respect our bleeding in the menstrual cycle can be like a little seed or fractal of what we can expand in order to support the loss or termination of a pregnancy.
How can we support people in understanding that de-medicalizing and de-industrializing care does not mean less safe?
Yeah, we have to heal our cultural amnesia. We need to remember that the current models of care that we have and the industries that are in place are in fact patriarchal, capitalistic, systemic, oppressive systems that are industries. They're not actually healing modalities. There's not a healing modality of modern science. It has been developed and practiced within the context of a for-profit industry, and that it's really inappropriate to try and seek healing from an industry. What we can have from an industry are goods or services that can then support our healing, potentially, if we are able to choose those goods and services, making informed consensual decisions. But that the way that the industry and the sciences have been developed are not such that they actually are even capable of or mindful of what it would be to promote true healing rather than the distribution of goods and services for a profit. And so the traditional ways of healing of midwives and witches and wise women for time immemorial were built on relationality and continuity of care, as well as a relationship with the spirit and the land and herbal medicines and our relationship with the divine and with plants, and that replacing ourselves within the ecosystem, our bodies as part of this ecosystem, is part of the medicine of de-medicalizing and de-industrializing our care.
Yes, this is so profound. It actually makes me think about a very profound personal experience that I actually just experienced. We went through an entire journey of allowing my grandmother to transition to spirit world.
Yeah.
And we all felt as a family that her place was not in a hospital. She was in a hospital. And we all felt so strongly like she needs to go home. She needs to go home. She needs to go to where she knows best, where she has her roots like planted in the soil, where her orchids are, where her bed is. And we managed to bring her home. And it was such a nourishing, beautiful time where we as granddaughters like supported our grandmother to be washed every day and support her going to the bathroom and like holding her up with my own body weight because she was unable to do that herself, but she could trust that we would support her. And this to me, like we spoke about dying a little bit earlier, but the dignity that we can create in these processes and the respect and the compassion in all of these processes around our life, basically from birth to dying, it's such an important aspect that it gets lost in translation when we submit to the medicalized industrial complex. Yes. And this experience with my grandmother, she also passed on International Women's Day, which is very, very ironic, but also very beautiful because I had dreamt a week before that she would die on that day.
Uh-huh.
But this experience taught me about how important it is to bring such beautiful, big life events back into the hands of community and take agency over them and experience them as
Mm-hmm.
this sovereign right of being part of this earth, really.
Yes.
Thank you for bringing that up because it really helps me connect to this experience. And then also another layer of this is when we care for somebody who is dying, who has birthed the entire generation that is helping, like the way that I honored my grandmother's body when she was dying was like beyond. Because I saw like every part of her body, her breast that nourished my mother, her yoni that birthed my aunt and my mother, and so profound, so very profound.
It's a really beautiful share. Thank you.
Yeah, and to me,
Um,
it's like all connected. And this type of care that I could provide my grandma is what I
yeah.
feel people also deserve when they experience things like a pregnancy loss. Like
Yes.
this intimate care. It's such an intimate experience that deserves intimate attention and compassion.
Yes, it is all about intimacy. And to be able to have access to goods and services when we choose that and when we need them. And I want to clarify for listeners that I'm not anti, the entirety of the medical industrial complex. I think there's very valuable goods and services that we can consume, but we need to be able to be rational and clear that we're not obligated to consume goods and services, and that rarely does healing come from consuming. And the kind of care that you're talking about, the kind of reverence and nurturance and connection that you're speaking about with your grandmother is, yes, exactly what we have the right to have when we are losing or terminating a pregnancy. And that there are, of course, some moments where we would want certain services or goods from the industrial complex, but they're very rare and they're very acute when they do happen. It's not as common. And just the normalization of death is the other thing that is coming up as you speak about your grandmother passing and it being not an enemy and not a failure, but a perfectly beautiful and natural and normal part of being alive that includes pregnancy, loss, and termination. That is part of what it is to be human. Nobody is entitled to have a baby when they become pregnant. And pregnancy does not equal childbirth. And I think that's a powerful myth we need to demystify in our culture, where I think there's a lot of unhealthy expectations around that. And that statistically, about half of pregnancies end in death, not in birth,
Yeah.
end in a miscarriage or an abortion. And that it's not spoken about because of fear of death and because of living in a capitalist society that really prizes and praises and uplifts productivity and really sees the uterus as like a thing for making babies rather than the reality that the vast majority of people on the planet who have a womb are actively avoiding pregnancy, and that
Mm-hmm.
we do way more bleeding in our lifetimes than we do birthing, that's actually totally normal and deserves honor and reverence as well.
Do you think that given us bleeding more than anything, that has shifted? Like if you look at that from
Oh,
like
yeah.
from my grandmother's perspective or her grandmother, it seems that when my grandmother was a child, that her mother was more pregnant than bleeding
Yeah. Yes. And breastfeeding,
and
many of us,
breastfeeding.
when we breastfeed our young, the prolactin suppresses ovulation, which then suppresses menstruation for years. I do think we are at a really interesting, unprecedented time in so many ways. And that is one of them. I think the extended period of perimenopause and menopause also, like there's like this whole matriarch archetype. We used to be on this maiden, mother, crone, triple goddess
Mm-hmm.
framework for so long. And I feel like now we have this whole other archetype of matriarch that is neither the mother nor the crone. And that's, not specifically on topic, but I just want to throw that out for the ways in which we are being given this invitation to shape culture in the way that the wheel is spinning in a new way. So there's a piece of remembrance and there's a piece of innovation that is needed of us at this time.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when we are talking about all of these experiences, what many of us do realize is that there is things happening in our body from a very physiologic, anatomical perspective, which is also how the medical system approaches. You already mentioned that pregnancy is approached as a pathology almost.
It is a pre-existing condition with insurance. Yeah.
But I think, or I feel that many people can understand this physiologic, very practical part of what happens in the body. But then I feel we are so illiterate about all of the deeper layers that we can potentially experience when we move through transitions like pregnancy loss or a pregnancy or a postpartum. And I know that you sometimes speak about the womb as a spirit door. And I think that imagery is so profound, so beautiful. Even when I'm saying it right now, I feel like goosebumps all over my body because it resonates so much. And I wondered whether you could speak to that and share some of your wisdom on this potential of experiencing the womb as a spirit door.
Yeah, it's one that's a little bit challenging to put words to. And it recalls you speaking about the dream that you had, which wasn't specifically womb centered, but that you were gifted a dream about your grandmother's passing. And I've been gifted many dreams, mainly around birthing and dying and womb processes and pregnancies in my life. I have no control over them. I see them as gifts. There are several different anthropological records from different tribal cultures throughout history, throughout the globe, where folks who were menstruating would go to a moon lodge or menstrual hut. And when they returned, they would have counsel with the elders about what they dreamt, because their dreams were seen to be medicine and potentially prophetic, not just for their own lives, but for the lives of their communities. And I think there's so much to be said in the way that the womb is a spirit door, not just for our own individual egoic lives, but in the way that we relate to our ancestors, to the divine, to generations past and forward, and the energies of our lovers as well. There's a lot of teachings in wise women traditions around the way that menstruation and then any type of bleeding, including a pregnancy release, has this potential to offer us wisdom and transformation that is much more powerful and expansive than what our waking day-to-day normal consciousness and lives offer. And there's a lot there. We could go into neurobiology and, traditional practices around menstruating and birthing and divination, of which, our bodies are the bridge, right?
Yes, I totally agree. It also reminds me about a tradition I learned about when I was 21 years old and I traveled to deep in the Amazon jungle of Colombia, and I had the honor to spend some time with an indigenous group of people there, and they had a practice called pelazón, which was when a child started menstruating for the first time, and they were sent out into this special place where they were invited to dream and enter the dream space and then come back and share wisdom for the entire community after that. So these practices, we often talk about them as, like our ancestors did this, and it was something that we have retrieved from the past as wisdom and we have to maintain, but there is still so many cultures today who are still practicing this and are still honoring the womb as the spirit door to go to the dream space and receive downloads and wisdom and bring it back to the community.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I studied with a medical anthropologist. Her name is Cynthia Ingar out of Peru, and was offered a teaching and an insight into Indigenous folks in the Andes Mountains, seeing that menstruation and ceremonial moon lodge was equal to ayahuasca.
Oh, wow.
Without substance. That when the boys came of age, the boys were given ayahuasca to meet the divine feminine creative nature of the universe and be humble, and that the girls were sent to ceremonial moon lodge and that they were seen as equally potent.
Wow. I love that.
And so a lot of this has to do with also like creating a proper sanctuary, right? There are specific rituals and there are specific foods and probably songs and potentially plants to burn or consume that help us access this innate wisdom and this access to the spirit world that our bleeding bodies offer us. And they don't just arrive when we are trying to pretend that we are not bleeding or trying to serve the day-to-day external expectations of how we perform as a productive citizen. And so creating that sacred space, I think I also want to come back to miscarriage and abortion in terms of something that is sorely needed in our culture is really actually having a held postpartum period and really respecting that there was a pregnancy that was released and like a minimum of a 40-day period of special foods and special dress and special protections and reverence around that spirit door having been opened, that we do need those 4 pillars of rest and nourishment and warmth and community, and that there's a need for protection and ritual that takes us out of our day-to-day performative participatory lives to be able to really fully access the medicine in these experiences and heal with integrity.
Thank you for mentioning that again. And what I feel so much is that there is no compassion often when there is a pregnancy loss, and there is no understanding that we do need this 40-day period to literally come back to ourselves and be held by our communities. And it so often breaks my heart when I hear stories of people going through things like miscarriage or abortion, and then they go back to work like 1 week after.
Or the next day.
Or the next day. Yeah.
In the US, especially with abortion, folks it's in the medical literature from the clinics that you can return to normal activities the next day.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Which you might be able to physiologically, right? And then there's the importance for respecting that we are not just physiology. We are also consciousness and energy. And,
exactly.
There's no clinical data for me to reference, but in my years of experience supporting loss and termination, the only people that I have worked with who have had excessive or prolonged bleeding are specifically the people who are either lying through omission or overtly lying to their relationships in their home and their work situations and trying to pretend that it didn't happen. And I see the body begging for that nurturance and respect by bleeding more than it would be otherwise.
Wow, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
And another thing, like we went along a little bit further already, but one thing that popped up for me when you mentioned menstruation being this time of receiving the wisdom and opening the spirit door and just allowing ourselves to dream and receive whatever needs to come through. I just had this vision of the world where so many of us are literally blocking that with so many allopathic products.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it just brought some like sadness in my heart, like realizing that like how many of us are like literally stripping ourselves from the wisdom
that is available to us that can help us to understand who we are and take care of ourselves and know ourselves and be in community with all of this.
Mm-hmm.
It's just something that came through when you mentioned that.
Yeah, it's really profound. I mean, I'm, so deep in the work, as I imagine you often are as well, that I feel like I have these weird moments sometimes where I pop my head out of the clouds and look around and I'm just like, wait, what? they've really fooled almost everybody into thinking that this is a source of pain and subjugation rather than power.
Yeah.
And just, the suppression and the rejection. It's really profound how it's the collective spell,
Yeah,
that we're under, that we need to break the spell.
That's how it feels. And I'm also thinking about how much of a tool for intimacy and connection our cyclical body and our cyclicality can be to nourish our relationship with a loved one. Like, yes. I'm just thinking out loud, like whenever I would move through something that has to do with my body, I can share that with my partner and there is connection, there is intimacy. And I know that if I would ever move through a miscarriage or choose to have an abortion, there is this intimacy where we can also move through that together, even though he has no idea how it feels like physiologically and energetically in my body. They can be part of the process. And I feel so many people are experiencing this big event of pregnancy loss on their own because there hasn't been this foundation of connection and intimacy when it comes to our bodies, even though they maybe have sex.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it really also just tying that into our bodies are the earth. It's not a metaphor. And the respect for the cycles and the ebbs and the flows of our bodies being a way that our lovers and our family members can also respect the earth, right?
Yes.
That our culture really worships stasis and dominance and control, and that what we really need is dynamic balance.
Yes.
In terms of engaging with these cycles, that there's no such thing as life that is static.
No, the only constant is change.
Yeah.
And our bodies are the prime example of that. Like our hormonal makeup is like different every single day.
Yeah.
As
is the weather. And that there's no bad weather, there's only bad gear,
Exactly.
You don't go like yell at the sky for having weather. You need to dress appropriately for it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I love that analogy. I like that. To slowly close off, I love to ask my guests the question, like, how do you prefer and love to continue planting seeds for a more nourishing future for all people in cyclical bodies and those around them?
I mean, I think walking the walk is more important than any talk.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk and I could, write a dozen books and teach a million webinars, but actually embodying the ethics and the values that I am speaking, I think is the most important thing that I can humbly do on a day-to-day basis. And that is the best I can do. I don't have control over how other people live in their bodies in any way, but I hope that I can do what I can to embody and that will resonate and inspire.
Yeah, I think you're already doing that, Samantha, in so many beautiful ways. And I'm so grateful I got to spend some time with you and that you were able to make some time to have this conversation with me. And I hope that the people who will listen to this are inspired and they will also have these conversations in their own communities. So this can create like a ripple effect all over the world in anyone's community who listens to this podcast. That's my wish.
Indeed. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming on. And if people want to get in touch with you or find you in the online space, where can they best find you?
The best way to connect with me is through my online learning membership, which is called the Fruit of Knowledge Learning Community. And my website, which is my name, Samantha Zipporah, ZIPPORAH.com. I have a bit of a fickle in and out relationship with Instagram. So I am there. You can follow me, but know that I don't do DMs, and I tend to take really extended periods off of that app for my mental health. So my website, the membership, I do Q&As every month for my members, and there's an abundance of resources and books and courses, an opportunity to drop in with me live every single month.
Amazing. I will share all of that information in the show notes, so we make sure that people can definitely find you. And I just want to thank you again for your time and your wisdom, and just for all the work that you do for all of us in this field and all the people with menstrual cycles.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks for carrying the water with me. It's heavy, but we're doing it.
We're doing it. And I'm very grateful to walk alongside incredible people like you.
Thank you, Iris.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, with your friends, with your family, post about it on social media, or leave a rating or a review on all the platforms. To catch all the latest news from me, you can follow at the Planting Seeds podcast on Instagram, or at Cycle Seeds on Instagram, or you can go to my website, www.cycleseeds.com. Thank you again so much, and I'll see you next time.